think we lost you, Angela. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. The federal agencies responsible for the dams continue to justify their operations. When you look at actual return on investment, power generation, navigation, irrigation, does the math add up?
No, absolutely not. I mean, when we look at the benefits, and there are benefits, the benefits are small. We're talking about 1,000 megawatts of electricity. You know, 1,000 megawatts of electricity is a single power plant, basically. Um, and we're talking about a heavily subsidized barging system. Um, and that is the primary benefit to the region. The main benefit to the region was actually in the building of the dams, and that benefit is long since gone. Now we are seeing diminishing returns on the electricity and on the barging, and the the logical choice is to start planning for a new system, right? To reinvest in a new system that actually creates abundant electricity. When we think about the growth of the Pacific Northwest, we're looking at a future where we need twice as much electricity than we currently have. And we're not going to get that abundant electricity by doubling down on a system that doesn't have any extra capacity. That 1,000 megawatts that we get from the lower four, there's not a feasible way to increase that. So it's just not a good financial bet for us as a region. We got to do something better. We got to think bigger.
Yeah, continuing to feed them into that. Considering impact on local and regional economies, fishing and outdoor recreation bring in billions of dollars annually in the Pacific Northwest, but the current system continues to undercut those industries. Can you walk us through the economic impact on declining salmon runs on these sectors?
Yeah, for sure. Um, Salmon are valuable, right? We know that. It's not just the cultural value of salmon or the personal value that each of us puts on salmon. Um, it is it's a dollar and cents number too. If you look at the low end estimates for salmon, we're talking around $200 to nearly $1,000 on the high end. That's per fish. So when we're talking about rural communities like Salmon or Stanley or Chalice or Lewiston or Lapway, we're talking about places that are missing out on millions of dollars every year in fish, right? It's the fish itself, but it's also bringing people into these communities. It's bringing in recreational and commercial anglers. Um, it is a huge opportunity. And I think what's really important that sometimes gets ignored is that those dollars that come to salmon, those are small business dollars, right? Those are family owned business dollars. And those are dollars um, that are direct and essential to Idaho. When you go fishing in Riggins and you stay at a local motel and you use a local guide and you buy gas from the gas station, and you travel through rural Idaho, that is direct impact for small businesses. Um, on the flip side, we know in 2019 that we lost the spring Chinook season on the Clearwater. And the estimates, the hindsight estimates is that was $8 million a month for 4 months, for around 34 million in losses. That's the Idaho Department of Labor number, which is probably pretty conservative. It may have actually been more than that, but that is a staggering loss. And when you think about the losses that we're facing from declining salmon in the upper salmon basin, it's massive. So it's both, a current cost, but a future opportunity to think about what robust runs of salmon would mean to Idaho.
Thank you for that. That's a huge eye opener. And what do we know about the economic impact of the lower Snake River dams on farming and transportation. Some say they're essential for grain shipping, but do the numbers back that up? Are there cost-effective alternatives?
Yeah, so I live in Eastern Idaho, right? I'm sitting in Pocatello right now, which is pretty far from the Snake River dams on the Snake River, but we're dryland wheat country here. I'm surrounded by dryland wheat. We grow a lot of it, just like they do on the Palouse. We actually grow it. We don't grow it quite as efficiently, so we get a little lower yields because we get lower rain. Um, but we still manage to make a profit on that wheat, right? So we know that farmers in Idaho growing grain crops can make a living without barging on the lower Snake. It is happening in lots of areas across Idaho. So we should start out knowing that. And then I think from that, knowing that that's a possibility, we do have to think about ourselves as Idahoans, right? We do have a responsibility to our friends and our neighbors and our participants in this Idaho economy. We have a responsibility to make sure that everyone comes out of this whole, right? We want to make sure that we lift all boats in Idaho. We can do that. It's 120 miles from Lewiston to Pasco, right? That is the section of river that we're talking about. It is 120 miles. This is not exactly a trip to the moon that we're trying to solve. 120 miles is something that we can accomplish. Um, and when you think back to that role that we have as Idahoans, it's important to note that while we try to keep these farmers whole in a changing lower snake environment, not everybody's whole right now, right? There are lots of people in Idaho, small towns, guides, outfitters, people who rely on robust runs of salmon, and most especially tribes who are not whole currently. They have been left behind and they're paying a steep price for this status quo. So we can change that and we must change that, right? Like we can get beyond this 120 miles of grain shipping. And as far as the specifics, Angela, I mean, I think, there are groups that are working on that. I think the obvious choice is rail. Um, but I'm not sure that it is uh, solely our responsibility to figure that out, right? We as Idahoans have to work together to solve this problem, and I think those of us in the conservation and recreation community are willing to do that. But we also need participation from the people who need to ship their grain, right? We can't just tell them how to do it. We can't tell them how to solve the problem. We need to do that collectively.
Thank you so much for that. Energy and infrastructure. BPA and dam supporters argue that hydropower from these dams is irreplaceable, but when we look at the market, is the power actually competitive? And what do the numbers say about whether we can replace it with renewables and grid upgrades?
Yeah, I think, to the second part of that question about what we replace it with, um, I think that's a spot where we need more leadership from Bonneville Power Administration. We Idaho Rivers is currently running an action alert asking BPA to come up with a vision for what they see, how they plan to meet the growing electricity demand in the region. Um, and right now, I don't see a compelling vision from BPA on how they're going to meet the demand. I think, doubling down on old systems like the lower four, which are not um, particularly effective and are growing less effective because of drought and less availability of water. That's a bad bet, right? We know right now that the dam's peak output does not coincide with peak demand. The dam's output mostly benefits people out of state. When the Pacific Northwest needs energy in the hottest part of the summer and in the coldest part of the winter, that's when the flows are the lowest. So the dams are not a boon to those of us in the Pacific Northwest. The power is mostly useful to California when we don't need it, frankly. So I think the challenge for BPA, and it is a challenge because BPA is a federal agency that is not always looking to the next thing. The challenge for BPA is to stop looking back, right? And start looking forward, to stop thinking about, the systems of 1955 and, in order to benefit their customers, to start thinking about what we're going to do in 2055, which 2055 is coming up pretty quick. Um, it is it's not some far off imaginary time. It is a time that we have to plan for right now. And I think BPA um, needs to take more ownership in the future of what the region's going to look like after the dams.
Yeah, it would definitely be beneficial to look beyond 5 years and um, consider building a future for our children. Our children will be around in 2055. How do we move past outdated structures and build a 21st century energy and transportation system that both that supports both people and the environment? And what investments or policies do you foresee that are needed?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to think about. Like, I actually love to think about the future without the dams, which is coming, by the way. I mean, the dams will come down. Um, and it's important to remember that when Congress authorized these dams, less than half of homes had a telephone, right? We were talking about a time when there was no internet, there was no cell phones, and there was barely regular telephones. And the people who built these dams, um, they weren't doing it for themselves, right? They were good jobs, but they were building dams because um, they they were trying to do something better, right? There was an idea that they were building something for future generations. They made a choice not to leave a legacy of horse-drawn carriages and oil lamps, right? They had this vision for a Pacific Northwest with telephones and electricity. And even though, I mourn the loss of salmon, I also appreciate it when I walk into my office and turn on the light and the heat's on. Um, and we have our grandparents to thank for that, right? Because they took the initiative to embark on these imaginative and challenging building projects. And I think I would say to people in the Pacific Northwest, what do you want to give your kids? Right? Do we want to give our kids the technology of our grandparents? Do we want to give them some 100-year-old dams and the bare minimum of electricity? Do we want to give them 140 miles of hot, stagnant reservoir? Um, do we want to give them the same declining salmon opportunity that we had? Or, the alternative is to do what they did in 1955 and to imagine something hard and challenging, where we can create a Pacific Northwest with 140 miles of free-flowing Snake River. We could recover salmon and the most important salmon and steelhead left in the lower 48. And we could build abundant new electricity, right? We could build new railroad. We could solve these problems. We know they're solvable. It's going to take will, um, but it is going to create immense opportunity for people, not just in this current moment, but for the next generation. I mean, I've got kids. My sons are 15 and they're going to be looking to work in not too long. And I wonder what kind of jobs there are going to be for them. And so when I see opportunities like this where we could potentially create, thousands of jobs and opportunity for hundreds of new small businesses that cannot be um, sent overseas, jobs that can't be done with AI, it gets me excited, right? I think maybe someday my kids will be working to restore this river, or maybe they'll be running a shuttle service on a lower Snake River, 140 miles of lower Snake River, or maybe they will be driving a bulldozer doing restoration. I don't know, but I know that there is opportunity in projects like this, and that's why they've been done in the past.
That's so beautiful to think about. I also have two children, and so I think a lot about what the future is going to look like for them and where how they're going to um, look up to what's going on with salmon restoration right now. It's very important to them. And so I wanted to circle back to the impacts on local and regional economies.
Mhm.
Where was that? Um, Oh, I'm sorry. The case for a free-flowing Snake River. When we talk about breaching the dams, what's the economic upside? And what does a restored river mean in terms of job growth and industry expansion and economic resilience?
Yeah, that's what I'm excited about is thinking about what that looks like. And I think, we would be looking at jobs for decades, right? The first jobs are going to be the jobs of physically removing the earthen barriers, right? And planning for um, planning for the restoration of the river. It's going to be building those new sources of electricity. Projects like the Nez Perce have already started on, building battery-backed solar. Those are incredible jobs. And then as we, replace those services, build those rail lines, restore that river, there's going to be additional opportunities that come down the road. And those are going to be, the opportunity to have 140 miles of new river, right? It would place towns like Lewiston instead of at the tail end of the lower salmon, the end of a float, right? Like you float out of Hell's Canyon or you float out of the lower salmon and then you land at Heller Bar. It would put them in the center of the most important whitewater recreation economy in the country, right? You'd have Hell's Canyon above, lower salmon above, and then you'd have 140 miles of river that historically had 66 rapids on it below. It's an incredibly exciting opportunity. And that, kind of goes back to that idea that what we're what we're proposing here is not what we have now, which is BPA as an employer. Those jobs are not going to go away when the dams come down. They'll go somewhere else, right? BPA's got plenty of dams. They've got plenty of Army Corps jobs around the country. Those jobs aren't going to go away. But what is going to be able to be created is these new family-owned businesses, right? That can use the river, that can use that 140 miles of new river. And it's also going to benefit existing businesses. So I did a trip this summer or last summer with some friends. We ran a private trip on the lower salmon. There was five families, I think two from Idaho, one from Colorado, and one from Oregon. And I just did a quick back of the envelope calculation for what we spent on that trip. We spent about $5,000 on that trip in these local economies. Um, and you know, those are real dollars that went to restaurants and gas stations and shuttle businesses. And it doesn't cost anything to have jobs like that, to have economic input like that, except you got to have a river, right? You got to have salmon. You got to have that natural resource economy. So I think, we're going to have lots of opportunities from dam removal, but they're going to come in waves and phases. If you look at the Klamath right now, they're starting to run trips on the Klamath. Those dams just came out, but there are uh, whitewater rafting trips on the restored section of the Klamath that are already happening.
That is really awesome to think about what is happening down there on the Klamath. Um, oh, so other regions have removed dams and seen these economic revitalizations. And thinking about the Klamath and stuff, what lessons can we learn from those cases, and how might they apply to the Snake River?
Yeah, I think there's two important lessons on the Klamath. I mean, the first lesson is um, this is not an if question. The lower four Snake River dams are coming down. It is only a question of when. I think there are people on the Klamath who thought that those dams would last forever, and they didn't plan adequately. And that's the second important lesson from the Klamath is that acknowledging that the dams aren't going to last forever and starting to plan and build now is essential. And it doesn't matter if you don't want the dams to come down, right? It doesn't matter if this is something that you want to happen. The truth is that it is going to happen, and we as a state and a region have to start making a plan for what comes next. Now, some of that has happened, right? The state of Washington um, is leading on the studies for replacement services. Um, that's an important project. But right now, Idaho's not at the table. And that failure by the state of Idaho and the Idaho congressional delegation um, to plan and build what comes next, I should say, with the notable exception of Mike Simpson. But that failure to plan for what comes next is going to hurt people in Idaho. So that, to me, that's the biggest takeaway on the Klamath is that we've got to start making a plan for how we are going to build the next thing instead of just waiting until it's too late.
Mm. So, in addition to failure to plan, what else is standing in the way of economic transition? And in front of economic transition, um, leading us away from the status quo, is it money, politics, or public will?
I actually think it's a lack of imagination, right? It's a group of people, which sometimes I'm part of too, um, that just can't see past what we have right now. Um, that's that is one of the things that I do find really interesting about the construction that brought us to where we are now, right? The building of these dams is it took it took really impressive moxie and imagination to say that we're going to dam 140 miles of the Snake River. When they made that decision in 1955, that was that took moxie. And when I hear people say that we can't build 1,000 megawatts of new electricity, or that we can't solve a 120-mile problem between Lewiston and Pasco, um, I just think that it's just a failure a failure to believe in ourselves, a failure to imagine a better future. And so I think, as far as like how we get past the status quo is that we have to help people see that, right? We have to help them see the opportunity of this. We have to help them see those jobs. And, you know, we shouldn't be planning to replace 1,000 megawatts of electricity. We need to be planning to build tens of thousands of megawatts of electricity. And obviously, the tribe has done a wonderful job of leading on that and building that battery-backed solar, but it has to be more, right? It has to be local communities. It has to be us as individuals. It has to be outside producers, and it has to be BPA, right? We all have to imagine more than we currently have. We have to imagine more than the status quo. and we can do it. We know we can do it, right? We put a man on the moon with less power than I have, less computing power than I have in my pocket right now on my telephone. We've done amazing things. We can do them again. We just have to we have to take the leap and believe in our ability to do better than 1955.
So I'm gonna take some questions from our audience. Um, we right at the beginning, you were talking about BPA and the 25 billion per year in salmon mitigation. We had a question come in about the 25 billion per year and what time period that was regarding.
Yeah, so that's actually not per year. That's 25 billion over the history of salmon mitigation. Um, so it's not that's not an annual number. That is since BPA's been doing salmon mitigation. Um, it's um, it's a challenging number to really nail down. We know what BPA spends, but we don't always, well, it's not that we don't always. We don't factor in those other costs, right? We don't factor in the economic impacts to places like Lapway or Stanley. So that's just the number, the direct cost for mitigation around salmon from BPA, which is paid for by ratepayers. So if you get your electricity from BPA or your rural electric co-op buys electricity from BPA, your money goes to pay for those mitigation.
Thank you for that. How do you create confidence in farmers that their crops can be transported affordably to ports so that they don't take an economic hit when the dams come down? That seems to be the most significant hurdle and maybe fear.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a valid fear, right? I mean, once people are used to a current system, the idea of taking it away is scary. We've started that process, right, through the Washington transportation study. Um, we need to build on that transportation study, and we need to build on outreach to the people who will be impacted, right? We have to actually go door to door, right? We got to talk to people and we've got to find some common ground on what the replacement solution is. And I think that goes back to that idea that, we as recreation advocates or salmon advocates, it's not our place to tell farmers how to ship grain, right? What we have to do is say, we need to save salmon. We need to restore the lower Snake River. We want to help you solve this problem. How do we do that? It's not, I don't think, helpful to always present a solution. We need them to come to the table. And that part of that is, you know, Idaho coming to the table. But I think to the question, I have every confidence that we can solve a 120-mile problem. There's probably plenty of people on this phone call who go 120 miles to the grocery store and back, or 120 miles to fish. It's it's a solvable distance.
Yes, I know my family goes 120 miles to fish and then some.
Yeah.
So we have a comment and a question. Thank you for pointing out the labor losses, 54 million due to all the jobs lost because of four toxic, low producing dams. That does not, that's not often elaborated well. How do you see BPA ever understanding that they are propping up a lose-lose situation?
Yeah, I think BPA is a challenging agency to work with. Um, they 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 are deeply invested in the status quo. I think that ultimately is the biggest challenge with trying to work with BPA is that um, they're resistant to change, whether it is change for their own good or pressure to change from the outside. And ultimately, that is the reason these dams are still standing. I mean, we talk all the time that if these were privately owned dams, they probably would already be gone because they just don't pencil out. The only way they pencil out is with the benefits of being operated by the Army Corps, with having multiple pools of funding, with having uh, Congress willing to extend you a loan. Um, I think for us in the region, we really need our delegation um, from the three states to think about BPA different, right? We need the delegation to think about BPA not as a low cost energy provider, but as a bureaucracy that is failing to plan for the future and failing to meet the needs of a growing region. And that is an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, is to rethink how we want this agency, which is supposed to operate for the benefit of people in the region, to look beyond the status quo and to actually look to our future and not just to the past.
Thank you for that. Discussing hurdles as an opportunity is definitely the forward thinking way to go about this. Um, and so we had several people ask that very same question. So I'm gonna go down a bit further. How can we infuse the process with imagination? Can we understand that nature, especially salmon, cannot wait much longer for people to fall in love enough to care about the nature and want to save it and preserve it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Time is not on our side. Salmon are headed rapidly for extinction. Um, the unfortunate reality is that these are not fast processes. These things take time. The good news is that you push and push and push and do the hard work of having conversations and planning and trying to, imagine a future collectively with our friends and neighbors. Um, and it feels like you're not getting anywhere. But then they tend to happen all at once. Um, there's a great story about the stonecutter, right? Who he's hammering the rock and nothing's happened for hundreds and hundreds of blows. And he finally hits it and the rock splits in two. And he says, it's not the final blow that broke the stone, it's the hundreds that came before. And that's where we're at on Snake River dams. It feels like we're just pounding on this big boulder, right? Just over and over again. And we feel like nothing is happening. Um, but things are happening, right? The conversation is changing. And even though salmon are up against it, we are moving forward. We are changing viewpoints. People are beginning to believe, even people who don't want the dams to come down, people are beginning to believe that these dams will come down. And I think, you know, in the next near future, I'm optimistic that it will be in time to save salmon. The rock is going to split, and we are going to move quickly towards a restored Snake River, um, even though it doesn't always feel like it.
Um, with recent economic cutbacks, has there been talk of defunding BPA by the administration?
I haven't heard that talk, but if the administration wants to cut bureaucratic agencies, I have a lot of suggestions for what they could do at BPA. Probably others do as well. I mean, for starters, um, be great to have BPA not managing fish. That's probably not a good role for them to be in, is the fish management role. I think we could probably get other folks to think about how best to do that. But the other thing is the dams don't pencil out. We could spend that money better elsewhere. So it's um it's a strange moment, right? To think about how our government agencies are changing, and for a lot of agencies, not in beneficial ways. Um, At the same time, I would love for them to take a look at BPA. Maybe they could put some river rangers back to work and instead think about that 10 billion loan they gave BPA. Seems like a better use of time.
What incentives or opportunities for buy can be offered to landowner farmers being frozen from you said funds?
Um, specific to landowners. Um,
I think specific to farmers.
got it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that is, Mike Simpson, Representative Mike Simpson, when he proposed the Columbia Basin Initiative a few years ago, I think what Representative Simpson did so well is to show us that the bill that will ultimately remove these dams and restore this river and recover our salmon, um, it can solve a lot of other problems. In fact, we could almost make it solve any problem we want to, right? This is going to be a big bill. It's probably going to be a $30 billion piece of legislation that's going to create jobs, solve problems, create new infrastructure. So I think we have incredible opportunity to do other things in this legislation. And that is part of how we're going to have to get buy-in, right? Is to have that conversation about, what do you need to be whole? How do we solve these problems? How do we solve other problems? This is probably going to be the most important piece of legislation that happens in the Pacific Northwest in my lifetime. And that is a small challenge and a massive opportunity.
Thank you. Let's see. Recommendations have been made that the railroads develop solar and wind generations on their right of way and have electric engines. Is there any indication that they are considering this?
I have not heard that they would consider that. Um, I would say it's a great idea, and I hope the railroads are thinking about it. It's yeah, maybe, maybe.
Do you have suggestions on how we can bring together public interest groups, political decision makers, and others to seriously discuss and plan for Idaho's future energy needs?
Yeah, so we've got to do a bunch of things, right? We've got to talk about this more openly, and I think, forums like this are great. This is an incredible opportunity for me, and I'm having a great time. Thanks for inviting me. But we got to do this with folks who disagree with us, right? We got to make sure that we are talking to people who maybe haven't thought about this problem. I spent a bunch of time last fall driving around and talking to Eastern Idaho farmers about this issue and learning about their viewpoints on it. And I think the great conclusion I came to is that they don't think about it that much. It's not top of mind for them. It's an afterthought. And we've got to change that, right? That's a direct outreach kind of campaign that we have to do to get people to think about it, to think about what their stake in the future is, and not just lean on the status quo. Um, as far as political decision makers, I hope everybody's calling Congress. Now's a good time to call your congressman. Don't send them an email. Call them. They need to hear from you on Snake River dams, on public lands, on funding for federal agencies, whatever you want to talk to them about. You should call them right now and keep calling them. Um, they are not hearing, particularly from people in Idaho, on this issue often enough. It's really easy for them to dismiss emails, particularly the emails that all of us, conservation organizations have on our websites, right? You go click, you email your congressman. They they count those by the hundreds and thousands. They're definitely something that helps a little bit. But if you really want to wake them up, make a phone call. send them a letter, go to a town hall meeting. You have to actually, you know, get a personal connection, make yourself a real person, and then say, I need you to help us revision the Snake River, recover these salmon, and make sure that there's going to be, you know, a booming economy so that my kids stay in Idaho or Eastern Washington and don't end up going somewhere else to work. Like, I'd like them to be close, so let's make some jobs for them. Those are the kind of things that resonate with representatives, and they need to hear from folks.
Thank you so much for that. I actually was going to end with that, going into what efforts and continued advocacy could our audience and anybody do to keep perpetuating this mission that we have. And so I very much appreciate those thoughts on what people can do next. Um, and I think that that is a perfect place to um, leave with our audience to think about what's coming next. And so I really want to thank you for coming and joining me today and just having some real conversation on some real difficult topics. And did you have any more input before we head out the door here?
No, but thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be here. Really appreciate the work that you are doing. I'm glad to be here. And if you're on the call, I hope you'll hang up and go call your congressman right now.
Yeah, we'll leave the next 15 minutes of the hour for you to go give them a call. If you want to go ahead and take a look back at the recording of this show, you can visit the Salmon Orca Project. We have our website. We are on YouTube and have a YouTube channel, or you can follow us on Facebook to stay up to date and get notices on when our next Salmon Orca Project speaker series is coming out. Thank you so much again, Greg. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Angela.
Yok hello. Yok hello.